creepy horror stories.
It was the kind of night that made Sam's skin crawl. A thick fog clung to the ground like a damp blanket, muffling every sound and blurring the edges of the world. The air was cold and wet, the kind of cold that didn't just nip at your skin but settled deep in your bones, refusing to let go. Sam wrapped his coat tighter around himself as he trudged down the lonely road. The old forest on either side loomed tall and silent, its gnarled trees standing like ancient sentinels, their twisted branches stretching out like skeletal arms. Sam cursed under his breath. He never should have taken that shortcut. His friends had warned him about the old road through Graven Woods, saying it was cursed or haunted or something equally ridiculous. But Sam didn't believe in ghost stories. He had laughed it off, chalking up the warnings to small town superstitions. Now, though, walking alone in the eerie silence, he wasn't so sure. The fog swirled around his feet as he walked, thick and heavy like smoke. He couldn't even see the stars, just an endless gray void above him. His flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, casting a feeble yellow glow that made the shadows seem to shift and dance. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under his boots and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Or was it the wind? Sam tried to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up his spine. He told himself it was just his imagination. There was no such thing as ghosts or monsters or cursed woods. He was just tired, that's all. He'd been walking for over an hour, and his legs ached with every step. He glanced at his phone, hoping for some sense of direction, but the screen was blank. Dead battery. Of course. Great, he muttered. As he walked, he noticed something strange. The trees seemed to grow closer to the road, their twisted trunks leaning inward as if trying to block his path. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that made his breath come out in visible puffs. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of his footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. Then he heard it, a whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. A soft, raspy voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sam stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. He held his breath, straining to hear. Nothing. He shook his head and laughed nervously. "Get a grip, Sam," he muttered to himself. "It's just the wind." But as he started walking again, the whisper came back, louder this time. It was a low, guttural sound, like someone rasping out a secret just out of earshot. He couldn't make out the words, but there was something deeply unsettling about the tone, something that made his skin crawl. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. "Is someone there?" No answer. Sam's pulse quickened. He picked up his pace, the gravel crunching louder under his boots. The fog seemed to thicken around him, swallowing the beam of his flashlight. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, like a dozen voices speaking in unison. He turned around, shining his flashlight into the trees. The pale yellow beams swept across the twisted trunks and knotted roots, but there was nothing there, no movement, no sign of life. Just the trees and the fog and the darkness. And then he saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees, barely visible through the fog. It was tall and thin, its silhouette unnaturally elongated. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the figure, unable to move. It didn't look human. Its limbs were too long, its posture too rigid, and its eyes, or what should have been its eyes, were two glowing pinpricks of pale blue light, staring at him unblinking. Who are you?" Sam stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching him. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, the voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony. Sam felt a wave of nausea wash over him as the sound filled his ears, a dissonant symphony that seemed to drill into his skull. He turned and ran. His feet pounded against the gravel as he sprinted down the road, the fog swirling around him like a living thing. He didn't dare look back. The whispering was deafening now, a chorus of voices screaming and hissing and laughing all at once. His chest burned, his legs ached, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The road seemed endless, stretching out before him in a never-ending line of gray and black. The trees loomed closer and closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. He stumbled, nearly falling, but caught himself and kept running. Then, suddenly, the whispering stopped. The silence was so abrupt it was jarring, like the world had been muted. Sam slowed to a stop, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He turned around, shining his flashlight behind him. The road was empty. He let out a shaky laugh. "See, just your imagination," he said to himself, his voice trembling. But as he turned back to face the road ahead, he froze. The figure was standing in front of him. It was closer now, its impossibly long limbs stretched out as if to block his path. The glowing blue eyes bored into him, unblinking, unrelenting. Sam's flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I don't know what you want, but stay back." The figure tilted its head, its movements slow and deliberate, almost curious. Then it took a step forward. Sam turned and ran again, blind and panicked, his feet slipping on the gravel. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. All he knew was that he had to get away. The whispering started again, louder than ever, the voices screaming in his ears. He could feel the figure behind him, its presence like a cold shadow pressing down on him. No matter how fast he ran, it was always just behind him, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness. He stumbled again, this time falling hard onto the gravel. Pain shot through his hands and knees as he scrambled to his feet, but it was too late. The figure was there, standing over him, its towering form blocking out the faint light of the moon. Sam screamed as the figure reached out with one impossibly long arm, its skeletal fingers wrapping around his throat. The last thing he saw was the glowing blue light of its eyes, cold and unfeeling as the darkness swallowed him whole. When the sun rose the next morning, the fog had lifted, and the old road through Graven Woods was silent once more. Sam was never seen again, but some say if you walk that road on a foggy night, you can still hear the whispers, faint and distant, calling out to anyone foolish enough to listen.